Hi, Jeff. Thanks a lot for joining us. It's a pleasure having you on the show, and I'd love to talk a little more about your book, Authentic Selling, and learn some of the insights you've learned over the past years. So just to get us started, can you share a little about yourself and what you've been up to?
First of all, thanks for having me. My name's Jeff Kirchick. I am the former VP of Sales at Nextcaller, which is a Y Combinator company that's focused on the fraud and authentication space. It was just acquired by Pindrop Security, and next week I'll be starting a new role as a strategic sales director at Cresta, which is an artificial intelligence company dealing with customer experience. I've been working in sales for over a decade, and my background is actually I studied English and creative writing in college, so I had something of an atypical background for sales, but a pretty good background to write a book. So it's a little bit about me.
Awesome. And can you tell me why you wrote this book and why it's particularly relevant in these times?
There's a few things, I guess. First and foremost, like I just said, I've been passionate about writing for a long time. I've been maintaining a blog focused on creative writing in college. I want to become a screenwriter someday. I thought if I was going to take on a writing project, that marrying something to my career, which is currently sales, would be probably the easiest way to do that. So that was one motivation. Another motivation, I think, just has to do with like the actual career that I've had in sales, the philosophy that I've built, the training that I've done for younger salespeople, and the way that they have really latched onto it, and the positive feedback that I've gotten for it. I wanted to kind of share that. I think that, we have our own experience is really valuable for others to learn from, and especially with the rise of artificial intelligence and machine learning, I felt that embracing what makes you human, which is your authenticity, is something that will become more and more important over time, and I wanted to share that message with the world. The last reason that I wrote the book actually has more to do with the timing of when I wrote the book. So I started the book last year, probably a few months into the pandemic. So I had a little more free time than usual. But our dialogue in the United States, what was, and I would say still is and has been for quite some time, particularly poor. When I say our dialogue, I mean quite literally the way that people talk to each other, whether it be on social media, on cable news, or face-to-face. The conversations are not as good as they once were, I feel, especially around politics. And I had made this observation that a lot of people were, kind of calling each other stupid or not really coming into conversations with an attitude towards finding mutual agreement. And I thought to myself that most people probably don't have much sales acumen to be talking to each other this way. You wouldn't, surely if you were trying to sell something to a customer, you wouldn't call them a racist or a snowflake if they didn't buy your product, right? So why are people doing that in conversations where they're purportedly trying to make headway with one another? It doesn't make much sense. So I thought that maybe putting out some messages around how you can build, around basic sales principles in everyday life would actually be valuable for anybody to read, not just salespeople, but any human being who lives in today's day and age and sees what I'm seeing, that we need to improve this, and wants to think about how to engage in a more meaningful way with others.
Makes sense. Great. So can you tell me, what is authentic selling?
Yeah. So the way that I define it in the book is basically treating the prospect like they are your best friend or a family member. And the reason that I use that definition is because you naturally treat somebody who's close to you more authentically. And so I guess in a way I've evaded a definition. So let me give you a real one. I think authenticity is really presenting an honest version of yourself. That would be really the succinct definition around what authenticity is. And I think that you often present an honest version of yourself to people who you're very close with, whether that's your best friend, a family member, people that you feel that you can be yourself around. You present an honest version of yourself, whereas people that you want to impress, you might not present an honest version of yourself. You might present a version of yourself that is designed, at least in your mind, to impress another person. And I think what happens a lot in sales in general is that salespeople feel that they have to put on another persona for the customer in order to impress that customer or to win over that customer. And what I argue in the book is that by presenting an honest version of yourself, you will build trust. And whether an honest version of yourself is a very boring person or an honest version of yourself is a very strange person, people can tell when you're being, generally people have a good way of deciphering whether you're being real or not. And what ends up happening is that people will naturally gravitate towards wanting to trust you because they perceive that you are being honest in the way that you present yourself to others, and therefore that you must be trustworthy in what you're saying. So that's the idea behind what authentic selling is and why I think it is important.
Then just make it very clear, can you give me an example of what inauthentic selling looks like and what authentic selling looks like? So a bad example and how you would change it into a good example of authentic selling.
So there's an example I gave in my book. Actually, there's a guy who once cold called me to sell me some sort of sales enablement technology, and I forget exactly how the call went, but I said to him I wasn't really interested in, I wasn't really interested in whatever he was selling. And his follow-up question to me was, so you're not interested in driving as much revenue as possible for your team? That was his question. And that's the type of question it's a trap. He's basically trying to force me into an argument that I never made, right? When I reject somebody who's trying to sell me some sales enablement technology, it doesn't mean that I'm not interested in helping my team. It just means that I don't find that product was going to be helpful, or that it's not the thing that I need the most right now. And what a good example, what he should have done instead was to ask me what would have been helpful to me. And I actually saw an example of this on LinkedIn recently, where somebody got rejected like this on a cold call, asked the person what they were looking for, and proceeded over the next week. The sales rep proceeded over the next week to provide that person with resources about how they might find that other thing. And then a week later, that prospect ended up signing up for a demo with the sales rep because he perceived that this person was just trying to be helpful and try to help him with solving his problems. And the first example I gave is somebody who's trying to pigeonhole me into getting a yes by basically making it seem that if I don't say yes to him, that I'm a bad leader. And that's just a silly strategy that most people can see through, and it actually irks people. In fact, I responded to him, "You're right. I am not interested in driving as much revenue for my team," because I didn't want to deal with him. I didn't want to deal with somebody who's engaging in that type of behavior, and I didn't want to have to answer his silly questions. But when you spin it on its head and you say, okay, well, what is it that you're looking for right now? Maybe I can help you. That's something that is a relief for people. It's like, that now they have another resource of somebody that can help them. And the other thing that I would add there too is that sometimes when you ask that type of question, if you mean it sincerely, sometimes it turns out that the customer will answer you in a way where there actually still is room for you to sell your product. You just need to understand what they perceive that they need and why, and perhaps why they don't feel that you are filling that void. But until you have that information, you can only make assumptions. And in the case of the first example I gave you, the assumption that was being made is that I'm not interested in helping my team, which is obviously a silly assumption, right? So you need to ask questions that are open-ended, but also not necessarily driven by your own agenda. It needs to be driven by the customer's agenda. And so I think that the good question there is, what is it that you need and why?
Is there any advice or framework or way to think about how does a salesperson become more authentic? Is that changing their mindset or something else?
Yeah, we talked a little bit about this, I think, in our other conversation last week, but I think a lot of it has to do with some sort of non-attachment to your day-to-day job and your career. I mean, even in it's a big world out there. It's a big universe. We're really like meaningless people in the grand scheme of things, and even the jobs that we do are a means to an end for other things that we want in our lives, and they're temporary, right? And so you need to go into your interactions with other people. Of course, you should take your job seriously. I'm not saying that you should just show up and not care, but you need to have something of a non-attachment. And what I mean by non-attachment is to not be so attached to the outcome that it's gonna emotionally make or break you. You need to be okay with the idea that people have different agendas than you, and that you're not going to sell everybody everything, and that it's okay if they say no. You need to go into it, I think. If you have a non-attachment to your ideas, if you're able to take yourself a little less seriously, I think naturally you can go into conversations with more of an attitude that you just want to be helpful and help people, and good things will generally come to people who want to be helpful. And I'm not saying that it works 100% of the time, but at the end of the day, what we're trying to do here is optimize for results. And I think that the best way to optimize for results, especially when it comes to getting people to a certain place, is to go in with an attitude that is geared around them and not you. But that the only way that you can get to that more altruistic mindset is by giving up what investment you have in your own success or failure. And again, I'm not saying that you shouldn't care. It's just that you need to be willing to not make it make or break your day, depending on the outcome is the way to think about it. If you have a setback, that's what it is. It's a setback and nothing more. And if you have a success, that's it. It's a success and nothing more. You still need to show up the next day. So I think something of when people start to think about how can I detach myself somewhat from what I am trying to accomplish every day, then naturally they'll be able to start putting themselves in a mindset that's geared around the customer.
Now, how do you communicate once you change that mindset? How do you communicate that most effectively? Do you start as a salesperson? Should you go on social media and start trying to help? Should you change your email campaigns? Should you change your call cadence? What changes do you see?
For me personally, I have, for example, you talked about email campaigns, and for me personally, I've tried to focus as much on how I can build commonality with customers. So, I would change my campaigns. I wouldn't make them, I think a lot of generic email campaigns, by nature of the fact that they're generic, they have to focus on what you do, you as in the seller, because you can't tailor it to each client. And I think inherently, that's somewhat problematic, right? Because, sure, you'll be able to send thousands of emails, but are they really great messages at the end of the day? They're geared around what it is that you're selling, and, you're competing with a million other people that are trying to say the same thing. And, let's face it, all of these tools produce the same outcome. They all purport to create similar outcomes. They're going to make you better, faster, smarter, less expensive, whatever. So I think in the end, I do start to try to change this a little bit, and I try to tweak it in a way where I'm trying to speak to the customer specifically, whether it's, talking about something that we have in common or something that excites me about what they do. I try to make it very personal. We talked a little bit about this last week, but, one of the concerns you have there is how do you do this in scale? And, there are ways to still personalize messages at scale that are not necessarily as specific to the individual, but can still riff off of current events in the industry, current events in the world at large, things of that nature, where you can still try to make the other person feel like it's about them and it's not about you. Beyond that, if I'm training a sales rep on how to engage with a prospect in a conversation, I'm looking a lot, obviously, at who's talking the most. Is it the rep or is it the prospect? And if it's 90% the rep, then that's a problem. It means that they're probably selling too much. What kinds of questions are they asking? Are you asking a question where you're asking the question because you think it's guiding the customers to a certain place, or are you asking the question because it's something that you actually just want to know? Is it bred out of genuine curiosity, or is it bred out of hey, if I ask this question, I think I can get them to agree? And I try to catch moments like that and like actually ask a rep, like, why did you ask that question? Like, what were you hoping to accomplish? And the answer is pretty telling. It's usually one or the other. It's either, oh, I thought if I asked them that question, I would get them to a place where they would say yes, as opposed to, well, I needed this information to understand whether or not we could help them, you know, and those are two different things. So I think those are maybe a couple examples of things that I try to start looking at by engaging in this mindset. I think the other thing is, like, if I'm engaging with a customer, I don't hold back on certain things that they ought to know. You know, think about like a job interview, for example. There's some people who put on a happy face for a job interview, and they might, you know, maybe there's something personality wise about the individual that they probably want the company to know to make sure that they would be accepted in that company. Like, in some ways, if you're in a job interview, it's good to just, whatever demons are in your closet, it's actually probably a good thing to maybe let them out so your employer knows, and you can make sure, like, oh, this is actually a great fit for me. They know what my personality is. They want me to work there. And I think the same goes for when you're selling to a customer. Like, if there's something about my product that is ugly, I almost want to get right out in front of that at the beginning, because A, it shows them that I'm honest, right? That immediately builds trust. But I want them to know, because if we end up working together, the worst thing that can happen is that we never discuss this type of thing, and now they're mad, and you as the salesperson have a problem, because now, are you even going to get paid your commission? Who knows? The customer's upset. You got to deal with it. In a way, you've created, you know, you've deferred some headache down the road, right? You kicked the can down the road on something that you shouldn't have. So I'd like to just get out in front of things very quickly. And if I'm being asked about a competitor, I don't do some dog and pony thing where I, you know, just talk about why we're better. I'll be honest. I'll say, you know, I think they're better at this and this. I think we're better at these things here. Like, the reason customers choose us is for these reasons. The reasons customers choose the competitor is for those reasons, and let the customer decide. But, you know, I think that by being honest, you show them that, you know, what you're saying is true. And if they ask the question to your competitor, they probably get a completely different answer. And that actually will move the needle for you. People want to work with people that they trust at the end of the day. So those are a few examples of things that I would try to do with that mindset in the back of my head.
Great, it's very interesting. So it's all about trust, and you can build that by being authentic and maybe foregoing some of your attachment to, I have to close the sale. That's driving most salespeople today.
I think so. Yes, absolutely.
So let's move on to the quickfire. What's your second favorite business book after yours?
There's maybe a couple that I'd put out there. Positive Intelligence is a really good book. And another good book that I read recently, I don't know if it's really a business book per se, but it's called Mindset. And I would say that both of these books focus on how you can change your mindset really in various situations to be not necessarily positive, but more growth oriented, and looking at setbacks as opportunities, and being willing to fail. And I think, you know, not putting too much pressure on yourself all the time, and not everything is binary. And I think those are some of the key messages that come out of those books. And what I like about them too is that a lot of times these things are easier said than done. Like, you'll read a book and it'll tell you to, you know, to be happier, or to, you know, whatever. And you're like, well, how do I do that? And what I liked about both of these books is that they actually give you like exercises you can, like very simple exercises you can do to train your brain to work differently. And, I'll admit, this is actually an area where I've struggled for a long time. I think I've had something of a fixed mindset, and I grew up in a very competitive environment. So if I didn't succeed at something, you know, I would get down on myself. And this is something I've had to learn as I've gotten older, is that, like, if I make a mistake, it's not the end of the world. You know, like, it can be treated as almost a good thing, because now I'll know to do better in the future. So these are areas where I've personally struggled in the past, and they're good books that have helped me.
And what do you wish you knew when you were 20?
I wish when I was 20 I knew to invest in my professional development more than I had. And again, I'll be in the interest of practicing what I preach with authenticity. I'll be very honest. and say I think that I wouldn't call it an ego per se, but I went to a great college, I went to a great high school, I was well educated. I was fairly privileged growing up, and I think when I went into the workforce, I kind of thought to myself, well, I'm going to be successful. I've had all of the tools to be successful, and I just need to show up and just work hard, and that'll be it. And I did fine. I did well, and I think that's probably a product of my work ethic and just kind of willing it so. But like, how much was I really learning? How much was I really improving? Were others around me passing me because they were making the intentional effort to invest in themselves? And I wished when I was like 20, 21, 22, beginning of my career, that I had been continuing to invest in my own education and my craft, rather than thinking, hey, I'm smart and, I've got a great background, so I'll just succeed. I eventually figured that out, that I should invest in myself and I should continue to invest in professional development and learn how to get better. But that's something that I always admire younger people that I mentor that are doing that, because they had the foresight that I didn't have when I was their age.
So when you say that you learned to invest in your professional development, what do you mean? Is it going back to school, taking courses, finding a mentor?
Yeah, it's like all of the above, actually. I have a mentor that I talk to fairly regularly. I am part of various communities for professional development, some of which actually do involve courses. So I'm part of a group called the Emerging Leaders Syndicate, which you get like a real curriculum and how to invest in tech companies and what investors are looking for in tech companies and things of that nature. I took a course last summer with Scott Galloway, who's the a professor at the NYU Stern School of Business and has written several books and has been on TV. And so, just stuff like this where you're basically obviously reading books and stuff too. And, just being intentional about trying to improve at work every day. I'm part of this group called Sales Huddle, for example. We meet once a week with other sales leaders and just talk about random challenges we're going through and help each other out. So stuff like this, where you are going out of your way to try to get better. I used to look at that stuff as kind of like people that were just kind of social climbing. Like I didn't view it as legitimate. And now that I've been more involved in it and actually taken away learnings, I view it as critical.
And just curious, how did you find your mentor?
It was kind of happenstance. I was at when I was 24 years old at my first job. I think I was in San Francisco for a conference, and I think the conference was over for the day, and I went to a bar to watch the Bruins game. They were in the playoffs, and this guy was sitting next to me at the bar. We were both clearly cheering for the Bruins, and we got to talking, and I found out that he was the COO of a tech company in Boston, and I was working in Boston at a tech startup. So we just randomly met while we were out in San Francisco for work events, and we stayed in touch. And over time, I started to really value a lot of the feedback he was giving me, and just kind of helping me stay level-headed about to make certain decisions in my career. And formally asked him, probably 2 or 3 years ago, actually probably about 3 years ago, to become my mentor. And we meet once a month. And especially recently with a lot of stuff going on in my life, he was very helpful for me. So I found him by chance, but for a lot of others, I think you can find people just by being intentional about joining some of these communities. And a lot of these communities, they actually encourage mentorship. So they actually pair people up, like within Revenue Collective, for example, they have a mentorship program. Mine was just by coincidence, but for others, I'm sure it's a little more, a little more intentional about how you do it.
And you just stayed in touch, kept updating him about how you're doing, and then eventually you said, well, would you be interested to become my mentor, that sort of thing?
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, really, we were just like friends for a while, I would say. But then once I started getting really invested in my own professional development, I thought, well, I should make this a more formal engagement. We should make this a once a month regular thing where I'm going to come with a topic, rather than just catch up with them, and shoot the breeze. I'm going to come with a topic and be ready to, to learn something. So over time, it developed into something like that.
Awesome. Thank you very much for sharing. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem. I appreciate you having me on.